Well, when you're in the middle of a building campaign, and you're the preacher, and you start thinking, now what do we need to do for Wednesday night Bible study? Your mind goes to Nehemiah. So Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Job. I have to sing the song to find the book of Nehemiah. You can find it on your phone, I'm sure, or there's a Bible there in front of you. And what's fascinating about this book is that we can date it. We know exactly what year it happened, and we know why it happened, and we're going to learn a good bit about how it happened, and we're going to do it in 3 parts. So we'll just do chapters 1 through 3 tonight, but I want to tell you this story. I have a laser pointer somewhere, but I can never find it when I need it. And then when I do find it, I think, well, now, where can I put it so I won't forget where it is? This is tiny little Israel. When you start, when we look at these big maps like that, it looks so big, right? It's 110 miles top to bottom. It's just really small. So this is tiny little Israel. And Wednesday night people have heard me say for years, the only value to that little piece of land is a highway. It's the only thing valuable. There's no oil. Even today, there's no oil there. The Arabs got all the oil. They don't have any natural resources. They got a lot of bananas and avocados. That's what they're growing these days. Yes, sir. Oh, you have a pointer. Is there a pointer on there? Look at that. Leave it to Daryl. Leave it to Daryl. So this is tiny. Now I got to stand still. Tiny little Israel. So we know that the Babylonians wanted. Now I was talking about why this part of the land is important. If you are Mesopotamia, Europe over here, or Africa, and you want to move troops from one to the other. In other words, you're over here in Mesopotamia, and you want to own the wealth of Egypt, you have to march your troops through this little corridor. And there is a highway that goes along the ocean. And that's what makes this part of the world so valuable. So we know that the Babylonian power, well, the first one, this was the Assyrian Empire, and they were destroyed by the Babylonian Empire. And when the Babylonians captured this part of the world, they utterly destroyed Jerusalem. The walls were knocked down, all the buildings were knocked down, they salted the fields. They did everything they could to make it undesirable because they wanted no Jews there. Now, they left some Jews behind, and they took all of the craftsmen, all of the builders, all of the nobility, all the educators, all of the wealthy people. They took them back to Babylon, and they made them live in swampland. It's called the exile. When about 50, 60 years later, the Persian Empire, see, this is Persia. The Persian Empire conquered all of this. Oh, here it is. Here's a different, you see that inset? Persia took over everything. And Persia had a different philosophy. They wanted, they ruled a little bit more liberally than the Babylonians, as long, kind of the Roman idea, as long as you were loyal to the Persians. Now, there's a good reason why here at Jerusalem, there's a good reason why the Persians wanted to build up Jerusalem again. Because when they destroyed it, it was literally in rubble. And the people who were left behind intermarried with some other people that were imported by the Babylonians, and they became half-breed Jews, literally, inbred Jews, or not inbred, um, outbred Jews, and they moved north from Jerusalem into the region of Samaria. Here's Jerusalem. They moved up here, and they took the name Samaritans. Now, there's a really good reason to rebuild Jerusalem, because it became a western anchor of the Persian Empire. Here's the Persian Empire. And remember, whoever controls this controls movement. And so there's a good reason why the Persians wanted to move back and rebuild Jerusalem. Now, the first wave that went back rebuilt the temple. And we call that Second Temple. Remember, the first temple was built by Solomon and destroyed, leveled by the Babylonians. The Assyrians allowed some folks to go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. And that was led by a man named Zerubbabel. How would you like to name your kid Zerubbabel? And a man named Ezra was a priest who still had a copy of the Bible, the Jewish Bible, the Torah, Mark, and Luke, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. He had a copy, but they had completely forgotten how to make sacrifices. Didn't know how to do that at all. And so they went back to Jerusalem and rebuilt the temple and started making sacrifices again. Okay? So now there is a small community of Jews who are living back in Jerusalem under Persian authority. They had no independence. And the plan was never to give them independence. They lived there under Persian authority. And now we're going to read about a man named Nehemiah who in 445 BC, we know exactly when this happens. In 445 BC, he receives word from people who are living in Jerusalem that the temple has been rebuilt, but the walls are in rubble. And by rubble, I mean that the fire was so great that the limestone was heated in the fire and crumbled. I mean, the rock that's left is fragile. Well, let's read the text. Yes, they are. Get on the bus with me and I'll take you. All right. So let's look at the book of Nehemiah. And I'm going to start, I'm going to come back in chapter 1, verse 1. The words of Nehemiah, son of Hakaliah, and anytime you see at the end of a word, it's short for Yahweh. It's a Jewish name. If it ends in Isaiah, you know it's a Jewish name. And it has the word God in it. Ezekiel, E-L, it has the word, that's another word for God. So that's kind of a clue to reading this book. If you see those names, they're Jews. So Nehemiah. In the month of Kislev, in the 20th year, while I was in the citadel of Susa, Hanani, one of my brothers, came from Judah with some other men, and I questioned them about the Jewish remnant that survived the exile, and also about Jerusalem. And they said to me, those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. And when I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven. So Nehemiah is a Jew who, when his family, and we don't know, he probably was born in Babylon, when his family was carried off into exile into Babylon, and there was the opportunity to go back, some of the Jews stayed. Now, why would they do that? Well, do you know the reputation that Jews have of being good businessmen, right? Middlemen, brokers. They learned that skill in exile in Babylon. Because they were craftsmen and farmers in Jerusalem, but when they moved to Babylon, they lost all that. They had no land, they had no trade, or they had no skills, they had no use for their skills. What they learned to do was become traders. And for some of them, they did quite well in Babylon. And they learned Aramaic from the Babylonians. When Jesus ordered a hamburger, he ordered it in Aramaic. And they learned that in Babylon. It became the international language of the day. So Nehemiah is a man who is a Jew, probably from a family that prospered during the exile. And he has a role in the royal court. The crown prince, in ancient iconography, it's not unusual to see the king and the crown prince on one side and the cupbearer on the other. Now, cupbearer literally is the wine taster. Okay, he's the one making sure you're not getting poisoned. But because of that role, he becomes very close to the king and a confidant, and Nehemiah had risen to that rank. He was a confidant to King Artaxerxes I. We know that. Something else about him, he was probably a eunuch. You did not rise to that level in the royal court and still have the ability to produce children and heirs, because remember, that would be a threat to the king. So Nehemiah is probably a eunuch. Now let's remember why that's important, because he ain't a good Jew anymore. He cannot go in a temple. He is mutilated and can never be a king of the Jews, because body perfection, that image, is very, very important. So he really doesn't have the qualifications to be a king. They made sure of that. But he's a man with great leadership ability and obviously intellect. And he goes to the king and he says, my home. Now, I think there's a good chance Nehemiah had never been there. My home is in shambles. And what he says is, the land of my father's tombs, sepulchers, is what the text says. The land of my father's graveyard is in ruins, and I want to go and rebuild it. And Artaxerxes, a little bit surprisingly, says yes, but remember the reason he did it. Because to have a Persian walled outpost on the western frontier guarding that highway up and down is purely to Persia's benefit. This is a good thing for Persia. And so he's allowed to go. I already told you that the temple was already rebuilt, the cultic practice, the sacrifices and things had started again, but the walled city was open to invaders. And now in the ancient world, there are, villages are not walled. Big cities are walled. And the most important part of the wall, the most difficult part of the wall to defend is the gate. And so that's why ancient cities have gates. I'm going to chase a rabbit here for just a minute. When you read in the book of Revelation the picture of heaven, it says there are 4 gates. Okay, we would expect a walled city to have gates, but the gates are never closed. Isn't that great? Heaven is a safe place. There's no armies ready to invade. I just had to chase that rabbit. 433, 445, he goes. He is named governor over this Persian outpost. And he stays for 12 years, and then later he will return for a second term as governor. His brother, we think, was governor in between. Now, let me just say a word about this book. It was originally in 2 parts, in 1 part. Now it's in the English Bible. It's in 2 parts. In a Hebrew Bible, it's one book, Ezra, or Ezra Nehemiah. But when the Bible was being delineated, canonized. In our Bible, it ended up as 2 books, but it's one. Probably it is all 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra and Nehemiah are all written by someone we just call the chronicler. We don't know who that person was. But Nehemiah is a memoir. It's written, a lot of it's written in the first person from Nehemiah, but it's written in the hand that wrote 1st and 2nd Chronicles and Ezra. All right, so now let's look at the text. And let me say one other thing. Kathleen Kenyon, is that a name you know? One of the most famous Middle Eastern archaeologists in history, a British woman, I think, Kathleen Kenyon, did some extensive excavations in 1967 in the Middle East. She's the one credited with doing most of the work at Jericho. Back in the 30s, in the birth of archaeology, the state of archaeology, she has found what she believed to be some of these original walls incorporated into the walls of Jerusalem, but they are 9 feet thick. These are not stockades like we see in Western movies. These walls are from here to Jim Hunter thick.
Did they actually cut blocks that thick, or did they laminate different sides?
Well, they would laminate. What they would do is build outer walls and then build a casement.
Okay.
So that they would build outer walls. And what they would often do in ancient, not here necessarily, but in the ancient world, you would leave between the 2 walls hollow, and they become rooms. Do you remember when the spies went into Jericho? And there was the prostitute's home was inside the wall. That was common. And if there was an army invading, what you would do is quickly fill that with rubble in the event that you needed that space. You need that space filled. So, but probably it was like a casement wall rather than a solid 9 foot of block. Although there are examples of 9-foot block. Okay. So now let's look at the text. We're going to skip around a little bit. Chapter 2, verse 1. In the month of Nisan, I drive a Nissan right here. Here it is. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was brought for him, I took the wine and gave it to the king. I had not been sad in his presence before. So the king asked me, "Why does your face look so sad when you are not ill?" This can be nothing but sadness of heart. I was very much afraid, but I said to the king, "May the king live forever. Why should my face not look sad when the city where my fathers are buried lies in ruins, and its gates have been destroyed by fire?" The king said to me, "What is it you want?" And then I prayed to God. And I answered the king. Have you paused and voiced that prayer? "Oh, God, help me." And then you lay it out. "If it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in his sight, let him send me to the city in Judah where my fathers are buried, so I can rebuild it." And the king says yes. Now, Nehemiah needs something from the king. He needs letters of passage. The governors, he needs a letter to show to the governors of the lands he's passing through so that he will be allowed through. And he needs a letter for the man who maintains the forest. That man's name, I forgot what it is. It's in the text, but it's a Jewish name. What is it? Asaph. It's a Jewish name. And so other Jews had risen to levels of prominence in the Persian government. Probably this is a reference to the cedars of Lebanon. You've heard of the cedars of Lebanon. The cedar of Lebanon was world famous, the cedar wood. In fact, we know that in the second temple that Zerubbabel rebuilt, there were cedars of Lebanon, and there are some archaeologists who believe that when those cedars, when that second temple was destroyed by the Romans, that those cedars were set aside, and when the Crusaders built their hospital on Temple Mount, that is now Al-Aqsa Mosque, that those same timbers are in the roof, are the rafters of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, because cedars of Lebanon are that good. They are naturally resistant to decay and to critters.
Aren't they much larger than the cedars that found in America? 'Cause I read something, they were much thicker trees.
I don't know, but we could Google that and find out, I am sure.
They were in the first temple, too.
Yeah, they were. Yeah, and that's why I say, Jen's right. They were in the first temple, they were in the second temple. These are extraordinarily valuable lumber.
Did the Jews have them laid aside for the next temple?
Not now, that I know of. Who knows?
How'd they have everything laid aside?
I know they've got a golden candelabra. You can see it in a glass case there when you stand at the Wailing Wall. If you look up, you can see it. So anyway, he's got these letters. Look down, verse 7. If it pleases the king, may I have letters to the governors of Trans-Euphrates. In other words, and this is a translation of the Hebrew, beyond the river. That's anything on this side of the Euphrates. Here, where's the Euphrates? There's the Euphrates right there. So anything over here is beyond the Euphrates. It's like saying the western frontier. Anything west of St. Louis is the west. It's that kind of, but it says here Trans-Euphrates. So that they will provide me safe conduct, and may I have a letter to Asaph, keeper of the king's forest, so he will give me timber to make beams for the gates of the citadel. And because the gracious hand of my God was upon me, and the king granted my request, I went to the governors, and the king granted my request. I went to the governors of Trans-Euphrates and gave them the king's letters. The king had also sent army officers and cavalry. Anything you do, there's somebody who's going to be unhappy with it, right? What do they say? No good deed goes unpunished. And we hear for the first time, we'll talk some more about it next week, but we hear for the first time the names of those who are against this move. Now we're going to talk about why they're against it. When Sanballat, the Horonite, it sounds like a Canaanite, but it's a Jew, and Tobiah, a Jew, the Ammonite from Ammon, official heard about this, they were very much disturbed, and someone had come to promote the welfare of the Israelites. Why is that important? Okay, you're going to have to use a little bit of your imagination. Here's Jerusalem down here. On a really clear day, on a high point, you can see the Dead Sea from Jerusalem. This is Samaria right here. Remember, you see the word Samaria? This is Samaria. These guys, Tobiah and Hezbollah, what was his name? Sanballat. It was one of those double letters. They are here in Samaria. This Judea, or Judah, as the Old Testament calls it, Judah, you hear Judah, Jews. My Palestinian friends say the only people who can claim to be Jews are those who are from the tribe of Judah. And so the word Jew comes from Judah. So this is powerless. Remember, Jerusalem was the headquarters. King David and the gang, and Solomon. It was big news. And Samaria was the Wadi Paytona of the ancient world. And now things have swapped. All the power is here in Samaria. So you have these Jews who are in Samaria very against rebuilding the walled city of Jerusalem. Why do you think that is? They don't want to lose power. Now, that never happens in our day anymore. We fixed that problem, right? People love to share power. No gerrymandering at all. So Nehemiah knows that he's got to do something here. He knows that he's going to have opposition, and so look at chapter 2, verse 11. And you know, any day I can use a map is a good day, right? I went to Jerusalem, and after staying there 3 days, I set out during the night with a few men. Why did he do that? Safety. Yeah, this is not a popular move. And he did it at night, and here's what he did. I had not told anyone what God had put in my heart to do for Jerusalem, and there were no mounts with me except the one I was riding on. He was the only horse. Horses draw attention. Especially, you got this fancy Persian horse with you could tell that's not a local horse, that's a Persian horse. So he's being mostly surreptitious. By night I went out through the valley gate toward the jackal well and the dung gate, examining the walls of Jerusalem that had been broken down and its gates which had been destroyed by fire. So let me show you as best I can what we're talking about here. This is Jerusalem in the time of Nehemiah. Well, this is about a couple hundred years after the time of David and Solomon. This yellow here is the original Jerusalem. It's called the City of David. And the oldest Jewish part of Jerusalem is right here. Now, this was added by Solomon, who built the temple. Remember, first temple was built by Solomon. Second temple was built by Zerubbabel. Remember that'll be on the final. And then, is there a third temple? The temple of Zerubbabel was still standing at the time of Jesus, but King Herod had done a massive remodel. So massive that I think it should be called Third Temple, but it's not. The time this temple that Ezra and Nehemiah built stood from the time of Ezra until the Romans destroyed it in 69 AD. Okay, it stood a very, very long time. About almost 500 years. But this is the city. Now, and this is the temple. This is a valley, a very steep valley. This is a valley that's now filled in. It's called the Tyropoeon Valley, and now it's you can't find it anymore. But it was a valley. But this north side is the most exposed. It's flat. This side, this south, this right here is on a cliff, or was in those days. This is right up here is the place that it's most easily breached on the north side. What he did, let me read. I want to make sure I tell you the right thing. What he did is he only went around the south side of the city. And you can see here, there's the word Watergate, the Fountain Gate, and the Pool of Siloam is right here. Remember Jesus told the blind man, he made mud and he told the blind man to go wash in the Pool of Siloam. That's right here. This is the most important geological feature in this city. That's the Gihon Spring. You know your history. The only place you ever build a city is where there's water. This is not a very watery part of the world. This is not the Ohio River Valley. And so the spring here, and during the day of Hezekiah, they built a tunnel to the spring inside the city walls. That was before the Babylonian defeat. In fact, that was probably the reason they held off the Assyrians, was because of Hezekiah's tunnel down to the water. So what he did is he spent most of his time walking around at night around the southern part of the city. We have no record of him going in to the north side of the city. So what's he do? He makes this secret reconnaissance. Terry, that's a word from your career. Even now, Christine will say, "Are you going on recon?" And I think, I don't know. I wasn't in the army. What do I know? Verse 17. Well, let's see if we can follow this. I got a extra minute. It says, by night I went through the valley gate, and that was probably over on this side, toward the jackal well and the dung gate. Let's see if it's here. It's not listed. Which had been broken down. And I moved on toward the fountain gate and the king's pools, down here, probably the pool of Siloam. But there was not enough room for my mount to get through. Remember, the walls are the stones have been pushed off, and you can't get a horse over these giant, what do they call those when they're huge stones put in a wall? There's a name for them. I'll think of it in a minute. And I went up by the valley by night, examining the wall, and I turned back and entered through the valley gate. The officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, because as yet I had said nothing to the Jews or the priests or the nobles or officials. And then I said to them, so he gets them together, "You see the trouble we are in. Jerusalem lies in ruins, and its gates have been burned with fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and will no longer be in disgrace." And in verse 18 they said, "Let us start rebuilding." So they did this good work. And then, of course, verse 19, Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem the Arab, and there were Arabs settled in this, they heard about it. They mocked and ridiculed us. "Are you building a rebellion against the king?" And, of course, what they don't know yet probably is that he has a letter from the king giving him authority. "The God of heaven will give us success." And so in chapter 3, we begin to rebuild, and we're not going to read much of it, but it's in sections, 45 sections. And here's what they did. All the people who lived in the area around Jerusalem, see, hardly anybody's living in the city. It's not a very nice place to live. The public transportation is pitiful. There's no good restaurants. You just can't hardly get around in Jerusalem. So everybody lives out in their villages. And what he does is he goes out to these villages and he asks them to start sending crews in, and they do. Now, interesting, Bethlehem is never mentioned. Bethlehem is just 6 miles away. Bethlehem is never mentioned, but towns 15, 20 miles away are in. And they start sending them in, and they start rebuilding the gates, the sheep gate. Now, there is a sheep gate. Right there is the sheep gate in modern Jerusalem that was there in Jesus' day. And there's a reason why the sheep gate is here. Because here's the temple, right? What do you need at the temple? Sheep. You need a sacrifice. So what do? You bring the sheep in through the closest gate, and you house them here, and they stink, and they poop, and they do all of these things that sheep do. But you got to have them, and so you clean them out. And that's why you also have a dung gate, right? Yeah. The dung gate is probably here on the Hinnom Valley side. Here's the Valley of Hinnom. Because it's refuge. It's the trash burning. Let me chase one more rabbit. This is where you burn your trash. And the reason you burn your trash here in the Valley of Hinnom is because that's where the kings of Judah sacrificed their children to Molech, the Canaanite god, and the Jews thought that was a great place to burn their trash. And the fires of Hinnom, and we translated that in English into Gehenna. So the word Gehenna stands for the word hell, and hell is where the burning trash dump is. And that's the valley of Hinnom. And right now, here's the valley of Hinnom. You can see Hinnom has a outdoor concert venue. A lot of people go to hell right there to hear a concert. I think that's where they play country music because that's what you would hear while you were there.
Have they done any archaeological digs around those transfer places?
Oh, they've done archaeological digs. Any place a Jew might have spit, they have done an archaeological dig.
They're not going to find much.
Oh, they found all kinds of things. I got stories about that, but I don't have time. I have 10 minutes. So here's what I want you to see. Verse 1 of chapter 3, Eliashib, the high priest, and his fellow priests went to work and rebuilt the sheep gate. Wouldn't that be normal? Because they're the ones who will be using the sheep. And what I want you to see in this, we're going to go very quickly through this list, is nothing is beneath anyone. No one says, oh, I'm going to send my servants to go do that. They all pitch in. Are you hearing a good sermon on a construction, a capital campaign? Everyone works together. No one says, I can't, because everybody can do something. They don't all do the same thing, right? But they all do something. And well, I don't know if we'll get down that far or not, but even the goldsmiths, remember these are the guys who work in making gold jewelry and stuff. They're pitching in and they're building walls. Verse 1, they rebuild the sheep gate. And then verse 3, they build the fish gate. That's a little speculation, I think, about where it was. Fish markets there. And in fact, I read that they have found pools that they think were where fish were brought in to be kept until they were sold. The fish gate. Verse 4, Meremoth, son of Uriah, the son of Hakaz, repaired the next section, and next to him, Meshullam, son of Berechiah, the son of Mehezabel, made repairs, and next to him, Zadok, son of Benana, also made repairs, and the next section was repaired by the men of Tekoa, and on and on and on. They all did their thing. They worked side by side, shoulder to shoulder. Nothing was too good for anyone. You get that?
Did we get along with one another all right?
Well, they were Jews. So, there was a little bit of conversation, I'm sure. Well, next week we'll talk about conflict. All right. And just, you could read it on your own. Verse 6 was what's called the old gate was redone. In verse 8, I wanted you to see verse 8. Uzziel, son of Hardward, one of the goldsmiths, repaired the next section. And Hananiah, one of the perfume makers, made repairs next to that. And they restored Jerusalem as far as the broad wall. Look down at verse 12. Shallum, son of Halushesh, ruler of a half district of Jerusalem, repaired the next section with the help of his daughters. See, the work is for men and women, for goldsmiths and perfumers. Everyone pitched in as they did their part. Verse 15, the fountain gate was repaired by Shallum, son of Kol-Hoseh, ruler of the district of Mizpah. He rebuilt it, roofing it over and putting its doors and bolts and bars together, bars in place. He also repaired the wall of the pool of Siloam by the king's garden. As far as the steps going down from the city of David, this is the city of David. So we know exactly the steps down. Here's the pool by the city of David. And here it is in Jesus' day. And here it is when we go to visit today. The bus drops us off right there, and we go into this new excavation, and a brand new excavation that I plan to get into is they have encountered the street, and they're opening it up, and it's underground. The street that goes from the Pool of Siloam up to Temple Mount, right up through here. And what's important about that is during one of the festivals, 7 pitchers of water have to be carried from the Siloam pool up to the temple, and we now know exactly how that was done. That tells us probably how Jesus went into the temple. Let me see if there's any other things I want to point out. Verse 26, the temple servants living on the hill of Ophel, and I can take you to that, made repairs up to a point opposite the water gate toward the east and the projecting tower. Verse 29, the east gate is over here. There it is. There's the east gate, and that lets you go over. This is Mount of Olives right here. Jesus stayed. Garden of Gethsemane is right here at the bottom of the Mount of Olives. Let me see if there's anything else. Okay. So I want you to talk. What do you see in this story? What are the themes that pop out at you? Cooperation. Now, Jim, you've led a bunch of churches and a bunch of projects. What's the secret to cooperation? 50 years in ministry and you still don't know? You mean I'm not going to figure that out? Yeah. How do you get everybody to cooperate? Prayer. And you know, every commentator you read will say Nehemiah prays a lot. He's always stepping aside to say, okay, I got to pray about this.
And he'll be successful.
And I think they have a shared goal. You know, if you, in my opinion, if you agree on the goal, it's a whole lot easier. And if you agree on the benefit of the goal, and they saw the benefit, they saw themselves as protection. Now, let's realize that Persia never saw this as a way for the Jews to gain independence. I'm pretty sure that was in their heads. It was not in Persia's head, but I'm pretty sure they thought this is a path toward independence. And of course, it will be eventually. The Greeks were defeated. The Persians were defeated by the Greeks. Alexander the Great overthrew the Persian Empire, and this became his empire. After he died, 335 BC, Alexander the Great dies. And now we have the rise with the kingdom is split in the Ptolemies and the Antiochians and yada, yada, yada. And then that gives rise to the Roman Empire. And then that gives rise, of course, and then we move into history, this side of the birth of Christ. The Jews did gain independence for 150 years under a man named Judas Maccabeus and his sons, who led a revolt against the Greeks and cast them out. They were successful. In the last 3,000 years, since the time of Solomon, Israel, Palestine, that area has been independent just a couple of times, and they overthrew the Greeks. And the period of the Maccabees started and the dynastic name was the Hasmonean line, and King Herod was by marriage a descendant of the Hasmonean line, but only by marriage. By his favorite wife that he had murdered. And that wasn't very smart. What else do you see? When you all pull together, you can do amazing things, right? Yeah. It takes everybody on a mission trip. Every time we've gone on a construction trip and you get there that first Sunday night and you think, oh, this is a nightmare. Or Saturday night, we get there on Saturday night, back in the old days, and you think, well, this will never happen. And on the next Saturday when you leave, you think, well, look what we did. It really is a remarkable experience to be on one of those projects. And nobody does everything, but everybody does something. You've been on a bunch of those. What we'll see next week is no good deed goes unpunished. There is always detractors, and we'll look at how Nehemiah handles his detractors. I got 1 minute. Final comment.
Many hands make light work.
There you go. Did you make that up? It's as true as humanity. It's as old as humanity. In fact, the word I wrote was division of labor. everybody does their piece, and big things happen. All right. I am taking tomorrow off to keep my granddaughter, who's 2. Pray for me. She's potty training. So I get a crash course in modern potty training. You don't do it the way we used to do it. You do it all differently now. So we'll see how that goes. Maybe she'll ruin one of the rugs that I really hate. That's kind of my goal. Just going to leave her on this rug and say, just. All right, let's pray. Lord, these stories are ancient but modern. They tell a story that happened to people long ago, but they tell our story too. My prayer is that you would help us each to see our little part. Keep any of us from thinking we've done it all, but help all of us to see we do have a part to make your kingdom work. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. I'll see you Sunday in the park. Remember, we're going to the park on Sunday. 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock. And if it rains, we're coming in here at 10 o'clock. Bring your own chair.